Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Mestizocast, and I hope you're having a great afternoon or evening or whatever time you're watching this. And today, this episode is going to be about the relationship of Hispanidad, Hispanic unity, and the Catholic faith, because the reality is that that the two are inseparable. Catholicism and Hispanidad are not one and the same, but you can't separate one from the other without completely losing. You can't separate Catholicism from Hispanidad without completely missing the point or losing a sight of the mission of our race. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And because it's in many circles, in many more nationalistic circles, I guess, there is a big and frankly scary placement on the importance of quote unquote like native religions, right? The idea of Christianity kind of being a foreign faith. I mean, you see this a lot with European neo-pagans, but you also do see this a lot with many mestizos, with many Hispanics, and that is something that is quite worrying. And I think the reality that people need to realize is that the native religion of the mestizo people is Catholicism. Without Catholicism, we don't exist. Now, obviously, without the native peoples of the Americas, nor without the Europeans, without the Africans, we wouldn't exist either, right? And while we are the indigenous, we are the Spanish, we are the Africans. Ultimately, we are the union of the three races, and perhaps more, depending on who and where you are. But ultimately, we are mestizos, and the first step to realizing our destiny as a people and what we are here to do is to first realize that Catholicism is the native religion of the mestizo people. You cannot separate the mestizo history and the mestizo identity from Catholicism, unless you're trying to blatantly copy other people outside of us, because religion is an important part of our people. It is to put it frank, it's an integral part of who we are. And I'm going to delve into that right now, because something that people should also realize is that the enemies of Hispanidad, the enemies of the Hispanic people, often utilize other religions and utilize faiths apart that aren't Catholic to try and control us. And the best examples that I can give, and the most blatant ones, are these two. First, I'm going to start off with the kind of easy one that I think most people can recognize, but after I'm going to give basically one that might be a little bit of a harder pill to swallow, especially when it comes to people who really value ecumenism. But the first religion that is used to fight against our people, to control our people, is atheism by the international left. Now, if you know anything about Hispanic culture, Hispanic history, our identity, it should be already clear why atheism is totally opposed to who we are as a people. We are a spiritual people. All our roots ultimately derive from highly zealous people, whether it be the Spanish or the indigenous natives. And even afterwards, as mestizos, we are some of the most zealous people in the world, and that's also to say that like our people would not exist if it wasn't for a strong belief in God. One large vigor that like came to the Spanish was because of their religious zealousy, right after the Reconquista of Spain and Iberia, freeing many Catholics from the boot of the Arab Muslims. And that gave them so much of a let's say a vigor, I guess, a rejuvenation to kind of go out and spread the gospel. And that, as we know, resulted in the conquest of the Americas. And the inevitable glory of the Spanish Empire. Now I'm not saying that we as mestizos or Hispanic Americans are Spanish, or that we should unite back with Spain or become a colony again. That's not what I'm saying. However, our history and everything, who we are, is inherently tied to the Spanish. It is our language, and Hispanidad in the wider sense kind of recognizes that, because it's not the Hispanidad and Hispano-Americanism are not opposed to each other. You can value and embrace Hispanidad while also recognizing that though the Hispano-American countries need to unite, that we don't necessarily have to unite again with Spain, because ultimately our paths diverged. But regardless, that is who we are, and that's something that we should recognize, first and foremost, that Hispanics are a religious people. We've fought wars for our religion, whether that be the Cristeros in Mexico, or even the Wars of Independence, in a sense, because many of the Wars of Independence were not liberal in nature. They happened to protect the faith. They happened to protect the Americas from the influence of Napoleon. And that's what many people tend to forget. And atheism has really only been used by a tool of the left, of communists, to basically infiltrate and take control over our countries. I mean, this is most obvious in places like Nicaragua. Nicaragua has become very, very much has grown to a large atheist population. Now, thank God it's not the majority, but Ortega and these the Nicaraguan government constantly attacks the Catholic Church. The worst part is that they claim this Christian like this form of Christian socialism, but they're not that at all. I mean, and this is the same thing like pretty much everywhere, where like you see like indigenous groups, for example, going like, oh, Christianity it was brought by the Spanish. It's not for us, especially among like leftist groups, and they're atheist, and atheism has even infiltrated some parts of the church in Hispanic America. I mean, we see this with liberation theology, because ultimately you cannot have liberation theology comes from the influence of Marxism, a highly anti-religious, materialist, and anti-Catholic worldview. And I believe in Cuba there's also a growing atheist community because of the government there. And ultimately these countries do not act independently. These are puppets of Russia and China. These are puppets of outside forces who are trying to control us. And I mean, yeah, I mean that's simply what it is. Atheism is not compatible with who we are. And to circle back, I said there are mainly two religions that are being used to attack us. And the other one, it is going to be a difficult pill to swallow, especially if you are Christian. But like and especially if you value ecumenism. Of course, I'm Catholic. We should all be Catholic. But just because it sounds bad doesn't mean it shouldn't be said. And historically, this is absolutely true. And the reality is that Protestantism has also been used as an anti-Catholic, or not anti-Catholic, well, yes, anti-Catholic, but in the context of what we're talking about today, an anti-Hispanic tool to control us and who we are. And this is primarily came from the right. As I'm associating atheism with the left, I'm kind of associating Protestantism with the right in this case. And this has mainly come from the United States historically, with many missionaries and such trying to come to our Catholic countries and converting us away from the church into like Protestantism, and especially denominations like Pentecostalism and such. And I guess here's one big example of how Protestantism has been used as an anti-Hispanic tool to control us. In Mexico is a great example. Benito Juarez. He was trying to completely repress and remove Catholicism from Mexico, and it's crazy hearing this, but Mexico has a gigantic anti-Catholic history behind it that has used both Protestantism and atheism as a method to root it out. But obviously, Mexico and Catholicism are so inseparable that all these efforts have failed. And Benito Juarez was trying to promote Protestantism in Mexico to remove Catholicism in the interest of the United States, because he was like a Yankophile, basically. And much more of the dangers of Protestantism for our people is written down by our great prophet Jose Vasconcelos, the cultural caudillo of Hispanoamerica and the Mestizo people, in his book, Monrois, Monroismo versus contra Bolivarismo. It might be switched, but he basically talks about the difference between like Yankee Pan Americanism and Bolivarian Pan Hispanicism, and it's a great read. Unfortunately, there's no translation into English, but if you can read Spanish, I highly recommend that you read it. It is a gem of a book. You find PDFs online or something. It's fantastic. But anyways, Protestantism has also funnily enough, it's also been used in places like Nicaragua and Venezuela by the ruling elite, because it's much easier to justify your supposed Christianity when with Protestantism than Catholicism, because Catholicism is openly anti-communist, and ultimately both of these things have been used to go against us and our identity, bring us closer to either the United States or to China or Russia. And both of these things are terrible. They're evil. Who we are Catholics, in our conception and who we are. And I recommend that if you aren't Catholic, that you look into the church and don't convert to Catholicism just because it is our native religion as a people. Convert to Catholicism. If you are going to convert to Catholicism, I recommend that you convert to Catholicism. You should convert to Catholicism because it's true. Look into the history of the early church. Look into Catholic apologetics, and recognize just the importance of Catholicism to our history, to our culture, to who we are. Because, as I am about to say in this next part, without Catholicism, objectively speaking, we as a people do not exist. Now, we can go back all the way to the fact that Spain is the one with the help of Christopher Columbus, was the one who found the New World, and Spain was Catholic, obviously. We can go back all the way to that, all the way to that, but even after the arrival of Spain, the arrival of all the other European powers, the fact that we are a mixed nation, that we are mestizo, this would not have happened without the help of the church, and let me explain. During this time, the Jesuits were highly... They did their best to defend the rights of the Native Americans. That's absolutely true. But they also helped a lot and they recommended, they pushed for the need of intermarriage between the Catholic Europeans and the indigenous to convert the indigenous, and that's a great thing. And without that, we would not happen. And there are a lot of Groypers and such, or Catholics who are against race mixing for whatever reason, who don't really understand this. The church allowed and promoted racial mixing in the Americas, and if you are a Hispanic, you should be proud of that. If you are a mestizo, you should have immense pride in that, because without that, you would not be here. And there's some and I hear this a lot, from a lot of Hispanics, especially those who are more like I guess Yankee-philic, who talk about oh yeah, we should have gotten colonized by the British instead because we wouldn't have the problems we do now. We'd be just like America. We'd have blonde hair and blue eyes and da 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 da. And like, no, that would not have happened if the English arrived. I mean, the English pushed out the natives more than anything. They pushed them out of their territories. They chose to make to have diplomacy at a distance, right? And many of them they just ended up killing a whole bunch of them, especially when they got into conflict with them. But there was like almost no racial mixing between the English and the indigenous. And one big reason for this is Protestantism. Protestantism has an inherently very like Puritan kind of mindset, and if you look at the two main groups who came to the 13 colonies, being the Pilgrims and the Puritans, both are Protestant and both held a very English-centric view. With the Puritans, they believed in, they were heavily involved with the Church of England, but just like a belief that like they could make a more English church just farther away from England. And in the case of the Pilgrims, while they didn't submit themselves to the Church of England, they still had this Protestant view behind them, right? That ultimately led to this fascination with racial purity. And this is very obvious when you look later into the history of the United States. And like with the Ku Klux Klan, for example, the Ku Klux Klan was heavily against racial mixing, and they were heavily Protestant, heavily anti-Catholic. And this was so bad to the point that the KKK they aided the atheists in Mexico to kill and fight against Mexican Catholics. Does this sound like something that is pro-Hispanic to you, that uplifts us as a people? It controls us more than anything. And of course, we should recognize as well that ecumenism with the church is important, and that it is a noble goal that we should be striving for. We should be striving for the I guess, how do I say it? The cooperation of both Catholics and Protestants. But at the end of the day, we need to also recognize that Protestants are one. They need to fully submit to the church. That is what Jesus would want. But also that Protestantism has caused massive problems in the fatherland, in our home countries, and that it's ultimately a dividing factor. Our history, everything about us, is so entrenched with Catholicism and who we are as a people. Our like more nationalistic like Hispano-Americanist movements and such have recognized how important Catholicism is. And one author who goes into this, though he isn't Hispano-American or mestizo, he's a Spaniard, but he recognizes this like completely and it's great. It's a great read. Defensa de la Hispanidad by Ramiro de Maeztu. Another book that doesn't have an English translation, but still a very very good read. Hopefully, and I believe that soon there may be a version that's coming out in English, because I know someone who is working on an English translation of this book. And he makes great cases on the interconnectedness of Hispanidad and Catholicism. And he also brings up the Catholicism of many of our heroes, of our liberators. Like for example, Bolivar, Simon Bolivar, liberator of Colombia, and Colombia in the sense of like a Gran Colombia. He liberated Panama, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Bolivia too, and parts of Peru. He says, me permitiréis que mi último acto sea el recomendaros que protejáis la santa religión que profesamos. He's saying that the defense of our holy religion, Catholicism, is vital, is important. Bolivar, though he was a Mason in the beginning, though he was a Freemason, which, you'll hear a lot of Hispanicists, like those who want to unite with Spain, say, oh, Bolivar was a Freemason, Bolivar was this, Bolivar was that. No, Bolivar was a Catholic. There's so much evidence to back this up on how, one, the Masonic lodges in Hispanoamerica during the times of the independence movements and revolutions, they weren't even really used for Masonic activity. They were more so just secret locations to use for battle plans. But also, Bolivar largely abandoned Masonry and even revoked it, and implemented anti-Masonic laws. And this is something that many people forget. Bolivar was a Catholic. He recognized the interconnectedness of Catholicism and Hispanoamerica. And I would also like to give a quote by Pope Pius XI, that he wrote in Humani Generis Unitas, paragraph 128. And remember, this is a quote from Pope Pius XI. And in this quote, when he refers to South America, he is referring to Hispanoamerica as a whole. These principles concerning the respective rights of the colonizers and the indigenous peoples were, moreover, set forth by the Church shortly after the discovery of the New World. In spite of the frequent deplorable offenses men driven by avarice and political ambition then committed against these principles, the latter nevertheless, left their imprint. Thus today, we see that they have been adopted among the proud, powerful peoples of South America, or Hispanoamerica, who have a bright future. This is a living proof, let us note, that of the execution of the divine plans in the diversity and mixture of races. Catholicism paved the road for the intermixing of the indigenous and the Spanish, and ultimately the African sooner or later. And this is something that we need to recognize. This is so important to who we are and our history and what made us who we are. We would not exist if it wasn't for the Church openly seeing the divine nature of racial mixing, and how it created us, how it creates a godly people who are devout to Catholicism. And this is why Catholicism is so important to us and who we are. and even like in different movements, in different Hispano-Americanist movements, like the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party of Don Pedro Albizu Campos, they were heavily Catholic. Their symbol was the Cross of Jerusalem. They recognized the importance of Catholicism, and they weren't only just like kind of like liberal, left leaning, like just independence, like Puerto Rican sovereignty, whatever. Like how the Puerto Rican independence, quote unquote independence movement is now. These were devout Catholics, devout nationalists in the sense. It's called the Nationalist Party for a reason, but also they were concerned with the unity. Albizu Campos was he dreamed of the unity of Hispanoamerica. He dreamed of the unity between this one nation, because the reality is that though we are separated into different countries, we make up one nation, Hispanoamerica, or the way Simón Bolívar or other people from the time would describe it, Colombia. We're all Colombianos in that way. And though we have differences in regional cultures and from where we are, different dialects and such, that's ultimately what it is. It's a regional divide, but regional cultures can still exist as subcultures to one greater culture that exists as a nation. And one of the largest things that holds that up is two things, and these are not the only things. However, these are two very big things that hold us up together as one nation. The Spanish language, or just Iberian, Hispanic languages in general, including Portuguese, because Brazilians are just as Hispanic as we are, but also the Catholic faith. And Ramiro de Maeztu talks about this in Defensa de la Hispanidad, that our faith is one of our great big unifiers. And Pedro Albizu Campos recognized this. Pedro Albizu Campos was a devout Catholic who worked towards the independence of Puerto Rico. And again, this wasn't like a kind of like leftist, this wasn't leftist, this like the way that we view Puerto Rican independence now. This was not some imperialist movement. In fact, if I remember correctly, Pedro Albizu Campos even said that kind of calling it an anti-imperialist movement would kind of lead to its downfall. The downfall of Puerto Rican nationalism, Puerto Rican independence, but yeah, I mean, it's that's the way it is. So please, if you are Hispanic, and I imagine most of you are, because why else would you be listening to this? But even if you aren't, I mean, go to Mass, go to your local Catholic church. Embrace that aspect of your race, of your mestizo heritage, and learn about the early church. Learn of where we came from. Learn about how much fruit the church gave to who we are today, and how much they influenced our people in just the massive role they contributed, and not just us, our being, but our culture, everything about us. It's inseparable from the church, and trying to remove Catholicism from the equation, trying to remove Catholicism from us, will ultimately make us completely different. It will make us not even really mestizo anymore. At the end of the day, I mean, that just removes... It would remove who we are. We would just be more just like random, I guess. And you know, this is a bad term, but like mutts, right? I mean, we have a greater identity that, of course, it's not only reliant on Catholicism. However, Catholicism is an integral part of this, and we do need to recognize this. This is important. So please, go to Mass, learn about the Catholic faith, read your Bible, and spend your time in prayer. Pray for Pope Francis, who is currently, at the time of recording, in the hospital. And it doesn't look like he has much left. So please pray for him, and pray for our people that one day we can unite as we should. And pray for all the Catholics in our fatherlands who are fighting and getting persecuted by their governments. And pray for the abundance, the overflowing of Catholicism in our countries. And this is what I ask of you today. So, to just summarize this entire episode, Catholicism and Hispanidad are inseparable. That's basically the message I want everyone to take away from this. And yeah, thank you for listening to this episode of the Mestizocast. I am your host, Alejandro, and I will likely make another episode soon and talk about some other issues affecting our race, especially if you live in the United States. Thank you for listening.